Since we're talking about molds, a couple of different versions of molds, because depending on how you're planning on using them, you would design them differently. So all of the molds I have here are things you can use. Obviously some of these are pretty big, you might not use them for your piece, but you're welcome to if you want to. Morning. There's molds over there that are stacked up, which is where I got this one from, as well as this one. And then there's some molds that are underneath the table outside, which is where I got this one from. So the big difference between these molds and this mold, what are some of the differences?
This is for slip mold. Slip
It's
cast.
for slip, yeah.
Is that when you really just like put it between heavy things?
This one?
That one?
Kinda, but I think you're onto something. So
There
why
is
do
a
you think
form
that?
inside, and you have tube for outside on the upper part.
Yes. This one's also square. It's flat, right?
Yeah.
Whereas these are much more organic.
Yeah.
So it would be hard to pour a liquid in here because the liquid's always going to find natural level, and the top of this piece is higher on one side than the other. So I wouldn't be able to fill this with slip. Or if I did, I'd have to also like rotate it in the air or something. So slip cast molds are usually flat on one side because you're dealing with a liquid, and they also have an opening somewhere for you to pour liquid into. This is what's called the pour spout. So we can still use these for press molding, but you'll have to deal with this opening. I'm going to show everyone how I would deal with that. Okay. And press molding is just as it sounds. It is like making a stamp and pressing clay into it. Molds also we have everything from a one-part mold, which is right here, which I'm going to do first. This is the same sort of idea as like a hump mold or a slump mold, right? You lay a slab over and it takes that shape. There's only one side to this, which is what I mean by one part, and simply you would take clay and push it in. And I like to smear it around some. Now the same rules apply. We're looking for compression to get clay to stick together, because on these bigger ones, you can only add little bits of clay at a time to cover it. So we're looking for compression and then also evenness. We don't want it to be really thick in one spot and thin in another. So sometimes I'll take a knife, something sharp, and poke through. I'm pretty even. I'm a little thin here, so I'm going to push some extra clay there, and I'm a little thick right there, so I can pull some of that clay out. I'm going to smear to my edges. And since this plaster is quite dry, I should be able to take it out almost immediately. One trick to doing that is to take some other wet clay and see if you can get it to stick and pull it out. Let's see if I can do it. Yeah. Alright, so now you have your seashell. And it's going to be tricky to pull this clay off that I just stuck on. What I would do is, as you're working on your slabs and you're like tired or waiting for them to dry, I'd push clay in some molds, wait 15 or 20 minutes, then you're going to be able to use this clay to pull it out and not have it stick as much. This is also, it's really easy for me to accidentally knock it in some way. But right, you could make a bunch of shells, and now because they're clay, you could stick them together. You could alter them in some other way. You know, you could build with it, you could skin with it. So if that's a one-part mold, you really just push clay into it, okay? Two-part mold, this one is a little tahini bottle, if I remember correctly. So molds have what's called keys, which are these parts that are sticking out here and these parts that are recessed. And that's so that they can only go together in one way. You can't accidentally put it together like this, because it won't key in. Now, when this mold was designed, it's almost symmetrical. There's a name for this. When it's symmetrical, but it's inverted on one side, and I don't know what it's called. All that to say that this mold just about fits together the other direction too, and this is actually the wrong way. So you need to double check and be close, or double check to be sure that you're putting it together in the correct way. Hopefully they're designed in such a way that they only go together one way. That's the goal with keys. But sometimes you can see that something could happen. That's not. So for these, what I'm going to do, and it's a little tricky. This, like I said, it's a straightforward process, but there is still a skill entrance gap to get this figured out, to get the timing figured out. And I just rolled a little coil and I'm putting it in. We don't really want them to be solid. If it's a one-part mold thin like that, it can be solid. But this would be really pushing the thickness of clay that we can take through the kiln without letting it dry for a very long time. So I'm gonna push clay in both sides. Hopefully I can get this out without having to wait, and I'm just hollowing it out a little bit. Now the thing is I need to somehow get these two pieces to, is that the right way? Yeah, to stick together, right? And you can see this mold, whoever made this is a little bit broken here too, so there's gonna be a slight gap there that I need to pay attention to. So right where they meet, right where two parts meet, you're gonna roll very thin coils. And trace the outside. And I'm pinching, getting it to stick together with compression. Okay. So notice that, and I'm going to smear this in here too, that what I've done is I've added a thicker coil and I've also tilted it inwards. You see that, how it's not coming out over that edge? I still have this pretty clean boundary of the piece. I think that this is the best way to get the cleanest piece out. I'm going back and pinching it up higher than the plaster so that when I put two pieces together, the clay touches first, but that they're also pointed towards the center of the piece. I'm gonna do the same on the other one. And I know I have a gap here because the mold's chipped, so I'm gonna make it a little bit thicker there. What tends to happen a lot at first is when you're figuring out the timing of these, if you haven't compressed these coils on really well, then the pieces will pull apart and this coil pulls off of the half and the other half stuck in there, which might happen here, but we'll see and I can show you what that looks like. Then you're gonna slip and score the two coils.
Can we put some powder?
You could put some powder, yeah. So sometimes people put like cornstarch. Is that what it is? Is that what you put? Or flour?
For bread, you put some flour so
Yeah.
it's easy to take off from the mold.
Yeah, that can definitely help. So part of the reason we use pottery plaster though specifically is because it's more porous than other plasters. And so this is meant to take water out of it and it helps it release. But we might find out here that, like I'm trying to do this immediately to show you all. Sometimes you do have to wait. See, this is where it gets really confusing because this one is not. This is the right way. So now it's good. See how the clay's already touching, but the mold's not together? That's what I want, so that when I do put the mold together, I get lots of compression between the two pieces. And I'm gonna try and do this pretty immediately. So we got 1/2. Now, does everyone remember when we looked at those images, I talked about flashing a little bit? So this is what's called flashing, and that's a universal term for any time you're making molds. It's not just unique to clay. That's the extra material that kind of seeps out in between what's the parting lines or the multiple pieces. You can choose to leave this on your piece because it can look cool, and I leave this a lot on my pieces. It's sort of like static, it's evidence of the process. But you can also let this get a little bit stiffer, leather hard, and take a sharp knife and just cut that off and clean it up. What makes it's gonna make it a little bit tough for me to take this piece out immediately because now I have more surface area sticking, but I'm gonna try anyways. Okay. Yeah, got it okay. All right, so now I have my tahini bottle with flashing. So you can come back. Just like anytime you're working with clay, the timing really matters for the type of mark that you want, the kind of edge that you want. So if I wanted this to be really like super clean in the end, I would probably wait to cut the flashing off a little bit. If you are going to leave flashing, my advice is to don't get anxious about it and start touching it and messing with the flashing. If you're gonna leave it, just let it be, leave it and add it on. I feel like it looks a little bit more purposeful that way. Right, but now I could keep going. And if I wanted to, if I felt like the texture wasn't where I wanted it completely, I could go back in and scribe texture, you know, you could write the date on here, you could stack these. All of the things that this object can't do in real, as a plastic bottle, you can obviously change that with clay. So be thinking about that too. The other thing I want to point out is see this clay sticking out right here? That little bit. I mean, it's easy to cut that off. But what that is it's an air bubble that got stuck in this mold whenever it was being made. So whenever you're making molds, you're generally trying to avoid air bubbles because they become absences and then they show up on your piece. So any questions about 1-part or 2-part molds? Okay. I'm going to show these really quick so you have an idea. With this slip cast mold, I would do the exact same thing. I'd fill it in, put a coil. I'd fill it in, put a coil. The one thing is having to work with this hole. So to deal with that, let's see, I'm going to push clay all around it. Now that because I can get to it from 2 sides, this is where I'm going to really squeeze together and compress right here. If we don't have that compression, the great thing about molds is you can make really complex things or really sharp edges, like if you want to make pedestals or boxes, you can with molds because you can get so much compression pushing up against something rigid. So that's what we're looking for here, even though there's this gap. So you would have this, which is the pour spout, and then this is where I come back and cut this later. Okay. You could probably use a little bit less clay than I did to get that smaller, have less cleanup work for yourself. But it'll be the same thing. Just be sure that you're able to push from both sides where the pour spout is, and then put it together. Does everyone have questions about that part? Or how to deal with that? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to show a couple of other molds that I've made, just so you have an idea. These are both rock molds, and I'll show this one first. It's broken. Does everyone see that? So sometimes these molds, at least the ones I make, break. And it's broken right here too. But you can just epoxy them back together, which is what I've done to this one, and it's fine. Slip casting, this would, like you said, slip casting molds are very different. They're much more geometric. And so that's not happening as often. The reason these are breaking is because I'm trying to use as little plaster as possible. For one, for lightness, two, to conserve material. And in doing so, when I'm making these molds, I'm following the contour of the object. If I wanted to make this a square, I'm gonna have this huge volume of plaster where nothing's going on except weight and material. And so because of that, sometimes I accidentally make them too thin in certain spots, which is why it's broken here. What I have done though is I've added window screen into this mold, and so that's why it's still holding together. And so I can go back in and just epoxy it back together.
Did you originally put the screen in there?
Yeah, when I made it, I put the screen in to help tensile strength. You could add like nylon fibers, you could add fiberglass, you could add a lot of things. The window screen is like, okay. It is not maybe the best material. This one also has window screen in it. But I want to show this other solution that I've come up with just so that you all have an idea of what this could look like. The other challenge with making molds that are not square or don't have flat spots is getting it to key in together, right? I can't, like, how do I get this piece using keys like this to just stay on the side? I mean, it won't, right? It would fall off. And so I used to make them like this with keys that looked like this and molds that looked like this, and I would use band straps like everywhere and just be like strapping it in tension. And I did that for a long time until I started to try doing this just nuts and bolts, which is super simple. But the reason I avoided this is because plaster generally is not a material, like it has a lot of compression strength, but it's also really brittle. And so that's where I started adding window screen to help with that. I'm sure that I could inset another material in each of these, like a larger metal washer. I've used rubber washers here to help spread the weight out, but the truth is I don't really need that much pressure to just hold these things in position. And this works okay. But I need to take this out anyways, because this actually has a thing in it that I made for something and then didn't end up needing it, so it has a big clay rock in it. And I'm going to take it out and show you all. And then show, the last thing I'm going to also show is how to press clay into something that's too big for like one small piece. So I'm going to take the top piece off first. You can see, I'll pass it around so you can feel like it's pretty light. But you can imagine by the time this whole thing is together, like it gets heavy, plus clay in it. And bolting molds together is like that's not my idea. I think it's pretty like standard practice, just not with plaster. It's usually used with like a fiberglass resin or something that deals with compression a lot better. The other thing really quickly before I take this out, look how much, I just let this in here to shrink, look how much it shrunk. Like that's that 10, 12%. So if you ever have something in clay that's really, you can kind of sneak out of things. The corners, if I poured concrete in here or resin in here, it wouldn't shrink. If I had any undercuts, it would be super locked in. But where clay shrinks a little bit, I can kind of get away with things that otherwise would be more difficult. Oh, it feels like that piece did break again.
Have you already talked about how you make these multi-part molds?
Not really, but yeah, that one needs to go glue back together. What's the question though?
Well, I've only made square ones, so I'm having a hard time envisioning
How this was made?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're making a mold, you're really making a puzzle. Like you're making a puzzle around an object that's meant to encapsulate it completely without losing any detail, but that also comes back apart without getting stuck at any point. And so with something that's round, like a lot of the things that we've worked with or something like this, it's really easy just to, if we reduce this shape into just a cylinder, we have one half and a second half that pulls away really easily. And you can see that on like a lot of industrial things. Like I think we talked, there's a seam right here That goes all the way up this bottle. This is like a two-part, probably what's called an injection mold, where like material's forced into it. But some things you can't do in two pieces. And so the process is really to look at the object and kind of envision the way in which you can put plaster on a surface and take it off without getting locked in anywhere. And then you isolate that part of the object. So for, let's say with like this rock, whenever I was making this piece right here on the edge, I isolated this edge away from everything else by covering up the rest of it. And then I could just apply plaster in this one small section, take everything back off, and now I've just isolated this part, made an imprint of it, and now I can continue to move around the piece. And so that's what I did, isolating it in sections, being sure that I could pull these out and not have it get stuck anywhere.
What did you cover the rest of it with?
With clay. So, and I don't have to necessarily cover the entirety of it, just divide it. You know what I mean? I could just,
making a dam.
yeah, basically like a clay wall that came out right here in this shape.
Blown my mind.
It's pretty fun once you like. At first, the molds are very like labor intensive, and then like all of these processes, it becomes a puzzle, a problem to solve, and then it gets fun to see if you can do it.
Do you do one piece in one time, or when you finished one piece you leave it on the same place?
leave it,
You
yeah.
leave it and continue to do next
You
piece.
leave it the whole time because if you take it off, you might lose your registration.
Okay.
So so you always make it with the object in place. So actually, when I was making this mold, you have to imagine all this plaster and then this rock this size, which is probably 45 pounds. It got really heavy. And then the other thing that I'm designing for when I'm doing this are where my keys are at. So I didn't want to, I'm trying to save material here, so I just added material in particular spots, so I'm imagining keying it together. And the bottom piece is all one piece. Right, so this is just a big, something I was using for some other artworks, but a ceramic rock. My flashing is like pretty good, pretty minimal, minus this one spot. So this is where, if it was still wet, I'd come back and decide what I would do right here. Would I leave it? Would I cut it into it and kind of try and get more texture? The other thing is it's hollow, so it needs a hole somewhere, right? So even if you're making small ones like this, if they're hollow, and they should be sure you put a hole in it. I'm gonna pass this around too so you can feel it. It's not, I don't think it's as heavy as it looks.
No.
It's not as heavy as the rock is, that's for sure.
So you made the mold, and then you.
Like a illusion.
Yeah, I'm gonna show that too.
Okay, yeah.
So, I could make like 6 of those and just like slip and score them together and make like a tower of rocks, or I can make like a facade of a wall. Like, it's a fun thing to get to play around with, and molds, they really become just art making tools. So you can do lots of things, or you could use that for a base and put pots on top of it, or anything, from there. And like I said, y'all are all welcome to use. If you want to make a giant rock and take it home, we can do. It's not that big actually. But if you want to make a rock and take it, you're welcome to. This is also a rock. It's just a smaller one, and I'm going to glue this one back together here in a minute because I already have it apart now. So it'll be up and going. At home. At home, I've been moving stuff around, and so I thought they were here. I sort of have like 4 different places where art stuff exists.
Yeah.
And I get confused of like where the tools are at. But I have some stick molds too, and they're just like little twigs, which some students have used in the past, and they worked out pretty good. I don't think I have one. I think they're all I have some pieces. They're a little tricky to use. But the very last thing I want to show you is how to push clay into something that's larger. Because some of the molds outside, even like this heart, at this size, I wouldn't be doing the whole thing in one piece. I'd be doing it in little chunks of clay and overlapping it together. So it's probably similar to how you imagine. How would you go about doing this? How would you cover this with clay? It's not too tricky.
It's not true. It's like draping
Draping a
small
slab.
sheet.
Yeah, some people, and that's usually what people say too. And I, for some reason, like I just never, like, I don't know why I skipped that in my head. Like I think that would make sense to make little slabs and push slabs
Yeah.
in. But I generally work when I'm making my own artwork. I work with clay that's pretty wet. Whether I'm building or press molding, so like a little more wet than this even, like a little more wet than the clay you're working with for throwing. And that wet clay does work really well for press molding. But this will work too. And so the big thing is taking pieces, and you can even throw it down to get that compression, and then I'm spreading it out. Something this size, like 1/4 of an inch, is what I'm looking for. And I'm going to show two things. So you could do that, take another piece and overlap it a little bit. Again, compression is what's holding it together. As long as the clay is all the same moisture, start to spread it out. I know it's extra thick where I've overlapped it, so I'm just spreading it out some and peeling it up. It didn't show it so bad this time, but sometimes what happens when you do it that way is you get these overlap marks where the two pieces of clay were put on top of each other. And it's not a good or bad thing. It won't crack there if you let it dry in here, but it's just something to note. If you don't want that, you can throw clay down, spread it out, and then what you do is you feather out your edges. So I'm making it really thin. The one challenge with doing it this way is remembering that where my thinness and thickness start. Because again, I'm going to overlap. And in the end, I'm still looking for something that is even.
What is the process you use the most?
I use this one most often. And then I do this kind of thing in the back. It really is just like, I mean, the goal here is evenness, and I'm just smearing clay and compressing it. Like that is your end goal, so however you want to get there.
So the
Is
rock
okay.
is hollow.
Yeah.
Oh, you need to do a hole.
Somewhere in it. Yeah, exactly. And whenever I'm making this, like if I was going to make this mold again, I would actually assemble it all the way except for the last piece, and then I'd push clay in to the whole thing, and then just put clay on the last piece, this top piece, and flip it over and do the coil thing and stick it together, rather than one piece at a time. And that's actually why the flashing is so minimal, is because this is bolted together, and so there's not that much room for the clay, the material to escape that.
What did you ask? I didn't hear your question.
I asked the rock inside is hollow.
Yeah.
That's what it's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And you need to put some hole somewhere.
Okay.
There is-
So I didn't know that you actually did always need to poke a hole.
Yeah, usually.
Okay.
I mean, the truth is you can, right now we don't have, there's a little seam there, but there's a lot less seams. And this is just, the clay's wet still, which is why it's pulled up there. But if you want a smoother surface, feather your edges out and go. You also, like I said, you're welcome to use this mold. It doesn't mean you have to make the whole rock. If you just want texture from something, you can also just use it for texture. You could press slabs like this and just collect 3 or 4 of these and then build with them like slabs and make your own rock, like an invented rock, or make a surface for a building or something like that. Okay. Anyone have questions about any of that? Okay, cool. So that's it. What I would say is that if you have downtime on your slabs, grab some molds, press things. While those are drying, go back, work on your slabs, and then that'll be kind of your working method, juggling those two things. Okay? Cool.